So first question is just a little bit of background about yourself, where you're originally from, and
Sure. Well, was born in Wetaskiwin, Alberta, oddly enough. Raised in Lethbridge, and then live in Calgary now. But I sort of worked right across the country and have developed a bunch of hotels in the U.S. and a couple in Mexico, so kind of all over.
any different hobbies and interests?
Good question. Hobbies and interests. Well, I mean, my biggest hobby and interest is reading and sort of intellectual discovery. And I've been particularly interested in spiritual religions and stuff like that.
Oh,
And
okay.
so that's probably my biggest hobby. And my second biggest hobby is languages. I've studied probably over 20 languages,
Wow.
and I don't speak any, not even English, but but I've studied a lot of them, and my reason for being interested in languages and the spirituality side is that I really find that those are entries into understanding people, understanding their culture, understanding their background, and where they came from as a people, and I've always really enjoyed that. So those are my two probably biggest hobbies.
Oh, okay. Very nice. How did you originally get into the hotel business?
Bad luck. It was a family business. So I started when I was 7 years old. I was working in the bar cleaning glasses because my dad owned a hotel that had the bar in it, and so that's just what we did. At 7 I was working in the bar. Cleaning glasses, and then at 10 I was washing dishes before dishwashers, interestingly enough. So I was washing dishes by hand in the restaurant, and I was told that was the first step to becoming a chef. I think they were lying to me.
I was gonna say, how'd that turn out?
Well, I didn't become a chef. And then when I was 12, I was a bouncer in the bar, as I was 6 foot tall. I was 6 feet tall when I was 12 years old, and during Lethbridge's version of the Stampede, I was a bouncer.
Wow.
And myself and my older brother got into a couple of fights with guys at 12 years old. And there's actually a story that I was kicking a guy out when I was 12 years old. I was kicking a guy out of the bar, and the liquor age was 21. And he said, "No, save my seat. I'll be right back. I got ID at home." And I said, "I know you. You're the same age as my brother. I know you're not 21. You have to leave." So I went through this a few times, and finally a policeman comes up. He says, "What's going on?" And I said, "Well, I'm kicking this guy out because he's not 21, and he has to leave." And so the guy said, "No, I got my ID at home." And I interrupted him and said, "You don't have any ID. It's fake ID. I know you. You're not 21. Finally, he looks at me and goes, "Well, what are you doing here? You're not 21 either." Here I was 12 years old. I said, "Well, it's different. I work here." And the cop goes, "Yeah, buddy," kicks him out, and I went back to work. So that's life in Lethbridge.
Right.
So this story is about when I was, I think I was 9 or 10 years old, and I was working at the York Hotel in Lethbridge, and I was working as a dishwasher, washing dishes by hand, for several hours a day, and I was getting paid 50 cents an hour. And so when I was driving home with my dad, I think, you know what, I'm gonna ask for a raise. So I got my courage up, and I asked my dad for a raise for a little more than 50 cents an hour. I thought would be nice, particularly in the context that we were pretty poor at the time, and we were pretty poor for a lot of the time, and so we actually had to work. It wasn't that we wanted to work; we had to work, and all my wages went to my mother. Actually borrowed it, and this is a little tangent on the story, but she took all my wages, she borrowed it, and then used it to buy food for the family. And she kept track of it. When I went to university, she paid it all back, every penny of it,
Oh, wow.
which is really nice, except for we were going through about 15% inflation every year. And so by the time that she actually paid me back, it was really basically worth beer money. But anyway, so I got my courage up, and I asked Dad if I could have have a raise over the 50 cents an hour. And he looks at me and he kind of shakes his head and he said, you know, I'm paying you 50 cents an hour. For that much money, I can get anybody to do that job. Well, that was the hotel business. I was a wine steward when I was 15.
Oh wow, that's cool. And just kind of worked up from there, hey?
Yeah. Manager by the time I was 18, so so we grew up quickly.
You used to own Royal Host.
Well, Royal Host was a publicly owned company, and I was the president and CEO, and I was myself and a good friend of mine, Peter Sikora, started Royal Host, and he was the CFO and I was the CEO, and so but it was publicly owned. We owned a bunch of shares in it, but just to clarify that part. But I was sort of the initial driving force of it, and we had some fun.
What were some of the biggest or most successful projects you undertook through Royal Host?
Well, we ended up owning, I think at one time we had 40 hotels, and we had about 125 hotels under management, and then we franchised another around 90 hotels, and we had about I think 3,000 staff, and some of our notable properties were we had properties right across Canada, and our management operations went down into the U.S. And sort of our notable successes were the Grand Okanagan, which I was actually involved with developing it, and then we bought it into the REIT. Royal Host was a REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, and so that was certainly one of the other properties. What other notable ones we had? There was a Holiday Inn in Edmonton, Chimo Hotel in Ottawa that was was a good successful hotel, a Hilton in downtown London. So some of them, but a lot of them were just pretty mundane hotels.
Fair. Would you be able to tell us a little more about the Grand Okanagan, now the Delta Grand?
Sure. Great project. I think it changed the face of Kelowna, and to some extent it cemented Kelowna as the heart of the Okanagan. And we started that project back in '89, believe it or not, and we won a proposal call from the city of Kelowna, and we sort of envisaged right from day one. It was a 52-acre site. There's 9 acres we wanted to put into a hotel, 10 acres into sort of an apartment complex or condo complex, and then the rest of it we put into City Park. And so it was fun to do that because the City Park it had a beach. We had a 7-acre lagoon system that was connected right with Okanagan Lake, and that was actually won awards for some of the best urban design. So that was pretty positive, and the hotel has been very successful. And I think it's let me put it this way: when I go back to Kelowna, which is not very often, occasionally someone will still recognize me and say, "You're the guy that built our hotel," which is kind of a nice compliment because they use the word "our." Mm-hmm. And so I think in Kelowna and the Okanagan, there's a sense of proprietary ownership of the property, and that's very positive.
What about the projects like Banff Rocky Mountain?
The Banff Rocky Mountain Resort was our first. This is back in I think '85. That was our first foray into resort properties, and we had identified a piece of property in Banff on the way into the city. We acquired it, and then we identified that there was an opportunity to kind of do suite style units, which there weren't any in Banff, and we actually started doing a little bit of we called it right to use. It was effectively timeshare, and it turned out to be a very successful program.
Oh, okay.
And the property's still standing, so that's a good thing.
What inspired the idea of Pacific Landing?
Well, it's interesting enough that the Grand Okanagan inspired the idea. So we developed the private residence club in Kelowna, and this is back in 2003, and it was innovative in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that we were innovative is we were sort of ahead of the curve, and we were introducing a lot of green technologies and a lot of environmentally positive stuff. And we found that it was really, some people really liked it. In fact, some people bought just because of that. And it certainly didn't have the legs that it has now, because everybody, is incorporating that into their buildings. But it was ahead of its time. And part of what we were doing with the Grand Okanagan is it was sort of a playground. The location was a playground, and then the private residence club at the Grand was very much oriented towards having a spot in a playground. And that means, it was for, sort of the baby boom generation, which was sort of in their 30s and 40s, and they wanted a place to play golf, to go skiing, to go water skiing, and the Grand was just at the heart of all of that stuff. And so when we finished that off, and when I left Royal Host in 2005, 2006, I kind of looked at it and said, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next trend? And what are baby boomers always lead the trends for the last number of years? And so what's the next thing that baby boomers are going to want? And we kind of reached the conclusion that rather than a playground like they wanted when they were in 30s or 40s, now they're going into their 50s and 60s, and they were going to look for a place that was a place that they can live out the rest of their lives. Active, engaged, close to university, in a relatively nice climate in Canada, and a place where you could have a sense of community and engagement, and so that was the genesis of how the idea was created.
Okay, and then so what's, I guess, the vision? The next view. What's the vision for Pacific Landing?
Well, that kind of encompasses the vision. It's a place where people can find community, they can find engagement, they can find support for activities, and so what we have. Now we're kind of the dream is coming true, and so now we're just getting ready for people to move in, and the people that have been attracted here, it's been just absolutely incredible, because they are what I had envisaged we would have, and they're all really nice people. They want to be engaged. They're here every day, in the garden, taking care of things, and so the vision is actually coming true, which is. It's a nice dream.
It's really nice to see already happening.
It is, yeah.
What would be your favorite part of the project so far?
Well, my favorite part is I have 2 children that work in the company. That's a dream that I didn't even dare dream. And so that's second to none.
Well, and on that, Pacific Landing has kind of become a family business. Would you have anything to speak to that?
Well, it's actually, again, this is as it has unfolded, it's sort of, it's meeting the original dreams, and it's starting to far exceed them. And one of the pieces that sort of inadvertently came together was that when I started thinking about how we were going to do this, the first thing I did was reach out to Dale Fish, and Dale and I had worked together. Your dad had worked together for many 20 years, I think 20 plus years. And so I needed someone to deal with the construction, and there isn't anybody better than Dale. So I reached out to Dale, and I reached out to Ray Parks, and because we needed somebody local. We needed someone to help us on the various relationships, and we need somebody local, because the hotel business is a local business. And so they agreed to join us in kind of a partnership to get this thing rolling. And then as things unfolded, Ray's son fit right in, had a job. He's doing a great job. Kayla, you've joined us. For those of you that don't know it, Kayla is Dale's daughter, and I've got two of my, a son and a daughter that work here, and Emily and Jordy, and it's really become a family business. And I've heard several times from buyers that it's just such a nice atmosphere to have a real family atmosphere. And I want to say that in my career, I worked in a family business. So when we built all these hotels, that was a family business, and so that kind of came apart or dissolved or whatever the word is in 2005. So I am very happy to be back in a family-oriented business again.
Just makes for a nicer working environment, eh?
People care. Mm-hmm. The people care about each other, and they care about their customers, and it's just natural. So. Yeah.
Can you speak to where the development is currently at and what's coming next?
Sure. So we're just finishing off phase 1, 33 residential units. They look fantastic. So those of you that haven't seen them, you got to come out and take a look at them. And quite honestly, you know, I think I'm good at looking at plans and envisaging what they're going to look like. They actually exceed my expectations. They look really well. They look great. Well isn't the right word. They look wonderful. And so we've got 32 out of 33 units sold, and so there's 32 new owners moving in pretty soon. And we're just starting on phase 2, and that's a 20-unit development. That's going to be a very nice building, and it'll be I think 4 floors with a penthouse on top and a viewing deck with a kind of a bell tower, and so that'll look good on the you know, from the ocean side of the look when you look back at the property, and then we're going to start hopefully phase 3 in the not too distant future. So we'll probably start construction in phase 2 by September, and have it finished by the next September.
Perfect. One of the areas that Pacific Landing is very proud of is its various amenities that are coming. Can you tell us more about the amenities and what was the inspiration behind some of them?
So we're doing a bunch of things differently. And one of the things that's very different is that we wanted to have these community building amenities. So the first one is nothing builds community better than when you eat together. And so we put in a community kitchen that's to have a wood burning oven and all the other various things. And the idea is that people can book it and they can have family over, or they can get together with the community here on site. So that's the first piece. The second piece is the yoga studio. You know, eating together and then being active together. So the yoga studio will have some exercise equipment, and it'll have a yoga place, and it has a I should say, talk in present tense because it's built. It has an outdoor area for, you know, sitting and having coffee and getting together with your friends. And we're also putting in a woodworking area, Rod's Woodworking, and so that's another amenity. And we have an outdoor patio that has a viewing area, and you get together for, you know, barbecue or lunch, and just kind of sit there and enjoy the world. As we go forward into phase 2 and phase 3, our intention is to add more amenities, a swimming pool and club space and some things like that. And then ultimately, when we build the hotel, our aspiration is to put in a full spa and all that stuff. So.
You beat me to my next question. I was going to say, as a hotel guy, what is your vision for the hotel in the last phase?
Well, my first vision is for it to be successful. It'll be a multi-story, probably high-rise building at the back of the property, and we'll have some conference space in there, restaurant, bar, you know, kind of a pub, and meeting area. I think that there's a good demand from the students and the professors at the university, some from the Esquimalt base over here, and then there's just some demand in the area. But it'll have services that relate to that, and then the idea is that it'll provide services to the rest of the site also, in the same way that the Grand Okanagan did for the private residence club.
Oh, okay, nice. Can you tell us a bit more about Pacific Landing's focus on healthy living?
So the original vision was that people would be going for quality of life, and you know, that's what baby boomers were going to want in their last 20 years, in the last chapter of their life. And so to us, that meant being engaged. That's why we wanted to be beside a university, and Royal Roads fits that. Having a community around you for support, for engagement, that sort of stuff. Having opportunities for volunteerism, and so that's part of the community that we want to create. Is that not only is it about getting to know people and befriending them, it's also about finding common purpose and doing things together. And so that was the original vision. And then we came in contact with, got to know Dr. Theodore Costco, who is a very interesting guy. He's from the Yukon, and he has his doctorate degree from Cambridge in the UK, and he has studied healthy aging. And he basically has come to the conclusion through all the research and what have you, that and I think he puts it under 3 pillars. It's about being healthy, it's about being engaged, and it's about having community around you. So it turns out that all the things that we were driving for is what the masters of the subject say that's what you should be doing. And so we've worked with Theodore, and we've started incorporating those things. And as we roll forward, we'll incorporate more and more of that into our programming. And what we're doing right now is we're creating the physical space, and then we'll introduce the programming as we go forward. Things like gardens. I hadn't mentioned that earlier, but that'll be, it's a good part of staying healthy is for people that like gardening. And so that's part of what I wanted to incorporate as our social purpose for the project. One of the reasons that I started doing this is because I wanted to show that business needs to conduct itself with a social purpose as well as a profit purpose. I've got the social purpose figured out. I haven't quite got the profit purpose figured out yet, but I'm hoping it's coming one day. And but the giving people a place where they can get the most out of their life is the I think that's the social purpose. The biggest part of that is that the old way that we used to treat our people as they aged is we put them in a corner, we put them on a shelf, and said, you just sit there until you die, and and you can just kind of wind down in your last 20 years. The society loses a lot of skills if we do that. I want the exact opposite of that. I want people to be active, be engaged, and continue to contribute.
So Pacific Landing's really trying to break down the stereotypes around aging and like geriatric aging, basically.
Well, the old stereotypes, yeah. And we're trying to accommodate what people want, and we're trying to give a physical space for it. So there's lots of people that are trying to achieve that, and we're trying to actually. What I've found in the hotel business is that the physical space reflects how people think. The story I tell is that you can walk into a lobby of a hotel and you can just feel uncomfortable. Something isn't right, and you don't like the space, and you don't exactly know why. But the reality is that it's probably something like the room has the wrong colors, or it's asymmetrical, or it's not square, or there can be a million things wrong with it. But the physical space actually does reflect on how people think. So what we're trying to do is create, and we're certainly one of the first in Canada, and there's some in the US, but we're kind of doing a Canadian version. They tend to be walled off in the United States, and we don't think that way in Canada. We want to knock the walls down, and so this property is open to the community, and so this Canadian version of trying to create that physical place for it.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we're surrounded by amazing hiking trails and everything and all of that. It's just beautiful landscape around us. And we're also sitting right on the bird sanctuary, the Esquimalt Lagoon Bird Sanctuary. How will the development affect the sanctuary?
I think positively. So we, for example, bird sanctuary, part of our development is we're creating some new spawning grounds for fish. Birds like fish. It gives them a place to spawn. And we're actually going to be doing more of that. We're also in our creation of the in the wetlands. We're creating more wetlands. So we have a setback, 100-meter setback off the water on the property, which we're actually standing in right now, and we're going to actually be improving that for the birds, because we're going to be creating settling ponds and what have you. So between creating fish spawning grounds and creating these wetlands, that's actually improving the place for it. So they're going to be really thanking us, those birds.
Perfect. And Bee Creek, the creek that runs through Pacific Landing's property, is also a protected part of the area.
Yes.
How does that play into the development of the site?
Well, it's actually not a protected area specifically. My understanding is that if we chose to, we could have moved the creek. But we chose not to do that. We chose to respect how the community feels about this creek, and the community feels very strongly about it because the creek had deteriorated years and years and years ago. It's already 15, 20 years ago. It had deteriorated, and the community came together and restored it back to its natural setting, natural and beautiful setting. So there was a lot of man hour, a lot of love, and a lot of attention paid to it on this property by the community. So we have respected that, and so we have we've protected it. We've stayed away from from any kind of construction impact or anything like that. So we've been very, very careful, and we've worked closely with Patrick Lucy, who is a well-known environmentalist here. And we've actually come up with ways of enhancing it, like the spawning grounds that we talked about. And we're also hoping that in conjunction with Royal Roads, we're going to be able to take this, change the environment a little bit, change man's impact on that creek, continue the improvements that the community had done, and get some of the silt out of the creek, which comes in from Royal Roads property next door. And that will create, in itself, the whole creek will become more of a spawning ground.
Oh, wow.
And so it had lost that status because of the silt that's come off of Royal Roads.
Oh, okay.
So we hope to continue to improve it, and because of our concept, rather than the creek being an obstacle, it was an amenity because of how we viewed the development.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, I think that's all the questions I have for you.
That's great.